I never imagined that my life would change so quickly. One day, I was just a young dreamer, lost in my thoughts as the wind blew my hair in the small town where I grew up. The next, I was standing in front of an altar in Venice, the city of lovers, with my heart racing and my hands trembling, promising my life to a man I barely knew. His name was Lorenzo Duca, an Italian millionaire whose fortune was as vast as his reputation for ruthlessness. He was tall, with black eyes that seemed to swallow me whole and a dangerous smile that said I was already his, before I even realized it. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even my choice. My father, mired in debt, gave me away as part of a deal to save our family from ruin. "You're going to marry him," said my father, his voice hoarse and his eyes downcast. "He wants you. And his money is our salvation." I wanted to scream, to run, but the weight of those words held me back. And then, there I was. Dressed in white, with the veil covering my face like a curtain that hid my shame. The ceremony was a blur. Words in Italian echoed in the ancient church, the smell of incense mixing with his expensive perfume, enveloping me. When he lifted my veil and kissed me, his lips were firm, warm, possessive. I felt a shiver run down my spine. But it wasn't just fear. There was something else, something I didn't want to admit. Night fell quickly. Soon, we were in the suite of a luxurious palazzo on the banks of the Grand Canal. The room was a dream of opulence, velvet curtains, a huge bed covered in rose petals, and the gentle sound of the water outside. But I couldn't concentrate on that. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as Lorenzo closed the door behind us. He took off his tailored suit jacket, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. "You're mine now," he said, his voice deep and velvety, as he moved closer. I stepped back until I felt the edge of the bed against my legs. "There's no need to be afraid. I'm going to show you what it's like to be wanted." I didn't know what to expect. It was my first time, and no one had prepared me for this, for him. He held my chin with firm fingers, tilting my face to meet his. His eyes shone with a hunger that made me swallow. Then he kissed me again, deeper, more intense, and I felt my traitorous body respond, even though my mind was screaming at me to resist. His hand slid down my shoulders, lowering my wedding dress to the floor in a whisper of fabric. I was exposed. Vulnerable. But he didn't stop. His fingers traced slow lines across my skin, down my neck, around my breasts, until they stopped between my legs. He made circular movements there, gentle and teasing. I let out a sigh I couldn't contain. My whole body was shaking. But it wasn't just nerves. It was something new. Something warm. Something growing inside me. "You're going to like this," he murmured against my ear, his warm breath making me arch my back. Then he took me. First, slowly, guiding me with expert hands. Then with an urgency that left me breathless. He possessed me once, twice, several times, in positions I didn't even know existed. On the bed. Against the wall. With my body folded under his. Every touch, every movement was calculated to push me to the limit. And I, who had never felt anything like this, began to want more. "Please," I whispered, not even knowing what I was asking for. But he knew. He gave me everything. And I lost myself in him. When the sun began to rise, I was exhausted. My body sore. My mind in pieces. He slept beside me, his chest rising and falling, and I felt a wave of shame engulf me. What had I done? Who had I become that night? But as I watched him, something in me stirred. He was a stranger, a ruthless millionaire who had claimed me without hesitation. And I had liked it. The sun was barely rising over the horizon, tinging the Venetian sky with shades of orange and pink. But I couldn't sleep. Lying on the huge bed, the rose petals crushed under my body still exuded a sweet perfume that blended with his scent, a masculine scent of musk and power that seemed to be impregnated in me. Lorenzo was sleeping next to me, his face relaxed, his black hair falling over his forehead. And I couldn't take my eyes off him. My body ached, a pulsating reminder of everything that had happened. And my mind spun, trying to understand how I, a virgin until a few hours ago, had surrendered so completely. Before we begin, a quick note. This video is a work of fiction intended for mature audiences. It contains suggestive themes and passionate storytelling, designed for entertainment purposes only. There is no explicit content, violence, or real events depicted here. Viewer discretion is advised. If you're ready for a thrilling romantic tale, sit back and enjoy. I closed my eyes, and the memories came like waves, warm and overwhelming. I could feel it all again, the way he approached me, his dark eyes holding me as if I were the only thing in the world that mattered. "You're mine now," he said. And those words weren't just a declaration. They were a promise. A command that made my heart soar. But when he whispered against my ear, "You're going to like this," it wasn't just the deep tone that disarmed me. It was the warmth of his breath brushing against my sensitive skin, sending a shiver through me that made my shoulders sag and my back arch, without me being able to help it. He didn't take me all at once, as I had feared. No, Lorenzo knew what he was doing. His hands, firm and calloused from a life I hadn't yet known, slid down my body as if he were mapping out every curve, every piece of me that now belonged to him. First, he guided me patiently. His fingers traced smooth lines between my legs. Circular movements that made me choke on air. I felt a warmth growing there. A pressure I didn't understand, but which made me clutch the sheets tightly. "Relax," he murmured, his voice like velvet. And I wanted to obey, even though my body was shaking with nervousness and desire. Then he pulled me closer, his lips meeting mine as he laid me on my back on the bed. The first time was slow. Almost gentle, as if he wanted to teach me what was to come. But soon, the rhythm changed. I felt his urgency. The weight of his body on mine. The way he held me, as if I could escape. But I didn't want to. He took me against the wall afterwards. My back against the cold wood. His hands lifting my legs as I clung to his broad shoulders, feeling muscle tense under my fingers. And then again on the bed, my body folded under his. Vulnerable and exposed. But strangely safe. In the hands of that millionaire who claimed me without hesitation. His every move was like a dance, precise and passionate. And I heard myself whisper, "Please," without even knowing why. But he knew. His eyes sparkled with something wild. And he gave me more of him, more of that pleasure I had never imagined. I lost myself in the moans that escaped my lips. In the way he filled me, made me feel alive in a way I'd never been before. He turned me. Guided me. Possessed me in ways I didn't even know were possible. And with each one, I felt him delighting in my body, while I discovered my own desire. When it was all over, I was panting, sweat sticking to my forehead, my body heavy and sated. He collapsed next to me, taking a deep breath, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. There was something in his eyes, not just satisfaction, but a promise that this was just the beginning. What about me? I felt a wave of shame engulf me as the silence fell. What had I done? How had I given myself away like this to a man who bought me with money? A millionaire who saw me as his possession. But as he slept now, so close that I could feel the warmth of his skin, a part of me couldn't deny it. I had liked it. More than that, I had loved every second of it. I opened my eyes, the room bathed in soft morning light, and turned onto my side, pulling the sheet up to cover my naked body. He moved, one arm sliding possessively around my waist, and I caught my breath. Would he wake up wanting more? Did I want him to wake up? My heart was beating too fast, torn between shame and a desire I couldn't quench. Sunlight was already flooding into the room when I opened my eyes again. Lorenzo's arm was still around my waist, heavy and warm, as if even in sleep, he wanted to remind me that I was his. My body seemed to carry the weight of the night, every sensitive muscle, every piece of skin marked by the warmth of his touches. I got up slowly, escaping his embrace, and pulled the sheet up to cover my chest. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the mirror on the other side of the room reflected a woman I barely recognized, disheveled hair, lips swollen from kissing him, and a glint in her eyes that made me blush. I didn't know what to feel. The night had been a whirlwind of sensations, his fingers dancing over me, his mouth tracing paths that made me arch my body. The way he guided me with a mixture of firmness and care. But now, with the silence of the Venetian morning enveloping the palazzo, the shame came like an icy wave. I had given myself to him, a millionaire who bought me with his own money. A man who gave me no choice. And what was worse, I had begged for more. My voice echoed in my head, that trembling please escaping my lips as he pushed me to the limit again and again. I heard a movement behind me. Lorenzo moved, the sheet sliding away to reveal the outline of the muscles in his chest. He opened his eyes, dark and intense, and stared at me with a slow smile that made my stomach leap. "Good morning, my wife," he said, his voice hoarse with sleep but loaded with something else. A promise. A hunger that hadn't gone away. He sat up, his body still naked under the thin fabric, and reached out to touch my arm. His fingers slid across my skin, light as a feather, but enough to rekindle that warmth between my legs. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, leaning closer. His scent enveloped me again, and I felt my heart racing. I wanted to answer, but my throat was dry. All I could do was shake my head, my face burning as memories of the night came flooding back. He laughed low, a sound that vibrated in my chest, and pulled my hand to his lips, kissing it slowly. "You're shy now. But last night..." He stopped, his eyes shining with something wild. "You were perfect." I looked away, my cheeks on fire. Perfect. I had been vulnerable, exposed, completely at his mercy. But as he spoke, his hand moved up my arm, tracing the outline of my shoulder until it reached my neck. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to face him. "Don't hide from me," he murmured. And before I could protest, his lips were on mine, hot and demanding. The kiss was softer than the night before, but it still made me melt, my body giving in even as my mind screamed to resist. He pulled me closer, laying me back on the bed with one fluid movement. His hands were everywhere, down my ribs, around my waist, stopping just above the place where I could still feel the echo of his touches. "You're already mine," he whispered against my skin, his lips brushing my neck as his fingers made slow, teasing circles, leaving me breathless. "But I want more. I want you, whole. Every day." I should have said no. I should have gotten up and run away from that room, from that man who possessed me with such power. But when he touched me there, with a gentle pressure that made me gasp, I heard myself whisper a yes that I barely recognized as my own. He smiled against my skin, his teeth brushing my shoulder as he guided me again, taking me to a place where shame couldn't reach. We spent the morning like that, between crumpled sheets and muffled sighs. He explored me calmly this time, his fingers and mouth finding every piece of me that he hadn't yet claimed. I let myself go, feeling the pleasure build until it exploded in me like fireworks over the Grand Canal. When we finished, I was shaking, my body sated but my mind even more confused. He stood up, his naked body glistening in the sunlight, and looked at me with an intensity that made me shudder. "Get dressed," he said, throwing a velvet box on the bed. "I want to take you somewhere today. A present for my wife." I opened the box and saw a diamond necklace, the kind of luxury that only a millionaire like him could offer. But as I held it, feeling its cold weight against my skin, I wondered, was that all I was to him? A possession to be adorned and claimed? Or was there something more in that look he was giving me now, something I still didn't understand? The diamond necklace weighed heavily on my neck as I followed Lorenzo through the narrow streets of Venice. He walked ahead, the confident posture of a man who knew that the world, and I, belonged to him. The dress he had chosen for me, a light fabric that hugged my curves, seemed overpriced, like everything else he touched. His money was a constant reminder. I had been bought. But now, after every touch, every whisper, I began to wonder if I was giving myself away of my own free will. He took me to a private pier, where a gondola was waiting for us. The boatman greeted us with a silent wave. "A present for you, Lorenzo said, helping me onto the boat. His fingers brushed mine, and that simple contact made my body react, a warmth running up my legs as if he were still touching me as he had in the morning. I sat down, the gentle rocking of the gondola on the canal calming me, but his dark eyes were fixed on me, and I knew he wasn't finished with me. Have you ever seen Venice like this? He asked, leaning closer. As the gondola glided under an ancient bridge, the smell of salt water mingled with his perfume, and I shook my head, unable to form words. He smiled, that dangerous smile that made me want to run and surrender at the same time. Then I'll show you everything, he murmured, his hand sliding to my knee. His fingers traced slow circles there, moving a little higher with each curve of the canal, and I caught my breath, feeling the heat grow between my thighs. The ride was a delicious torment. He kept touching me, sometimes with hands, sometimes with his eyes, undressing me without even taking my clothes off. When the gondola docked on a small island, he guided me to a villa hidden among olive trees, the kind of place that only a millionaire like him could own. I want you here, he said, his voice low and laden with intent as he pulled me inside. The doors closed behind us, and before I could take a breath, he was against me, pressing me against the cold stone wall. His lips found my neck, descending in hot kisses that made me tilt my head back. You drive me crazy, he whispered, his hands running up my legs, lifting my dress until I could feel the cool air against my skin. He touched me there with skillful fingers that knew exactly where to press, where to circle, until my knees trembled and I clung to him to keep from falling. You like that, don't you? He asked, his mouth brushing my ear as I gasped against his shoulder. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My body was speaking for itself, opening up to him, begging for more. He lifted me then, carrying me to a long velvet chaise and laid me there with a reverence that contrasted with the hunger in his eyes. He knelt between my legs, his hands exploring every inch of me, his lips following the path his fingers traced. I felt the pressure of his tongue, the warmth of his breath, and my world was reduced to that moment, to the pleasure he was giving me without asking for anything in return. When he took me again, it was different, slower, deeper, as if he wanted to record my every sigh in his memory. He turned me over, guided me, bent me under him, and in each position, I felt him losing himself in me as much as I was losing myself in him. You're mine, he murmured, his voice hoarse with desire. And I heard myself respond with moans that echoed through the silent villa. We spent hours there, the sun lowering in the sky as our bodies met, separated, and met again, until I was trembling in his arms, sated and exhausted. When we finally stopped, he pulled me against his chest, his fingers playing with my hair as silence enveloped us. Have you ever thought about running away from me? He asked suddenly, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. I looked at him in surprise and saw something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before, a sparkle that wasn't just desire, but something deeper. No, I lied, because the truth was that I had already thought about it. But now, with the warmth of his body against mine, I didn't know if I wanted to anymore. He kissed me then, a slow, sweet kiss that made my heart squeeze. Good, he said. Because I wouldn't let you go. And as the sun set, painting the villa in golden hues, I realized that something was changing. He was no longer just the ruthless millionaire who claimed me. He was beginning to be the man I looked forward to meeting every night. And I was beginning to want to be by his side. The days in Venice began to blend together like the waters of the canals, fluid and uncontrollable. Lorenzo took me everywhere, dinners in hidden restaurants, nighttime strolls through illuminated squares, short trips to secluded villages where his money bought absolute privacy. But it wasn't the luxury that held me captive. It was him, every look, every touch, every whisper he left against my skin. I, who had entered this marriage like a prisoner, now found myself eagerly awaiting the moment when he would pull me close, making me his once again. That morning, he woke me with a soft kiss on my shoulder, his warm lips against my still sleepy skin. Get up, he said, his voice heavy with promises. We're going to Florence today. I want to show you something. I dressed in a red dress he had chosen, the fabric falling over my body like a caress. And I felt his eyes devouring me as I adjusted the diamond necklace around my neck. You look perfect like that, he murmured, pulling me into a kiss that left me breathless even before we left the room. The car ride was quiet but full of tension. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other on my thigh, his fingers drawing lazy lines that slowly crept upward, making me bite my lip to stifle a sigh. When we arrived at a villa atop a hill surrounded by vineyards, the sun was high, but the heat I felt did not come from the sky. He led me inside, the doors closing behind us with a click that echoed in my chest. "I want you now," he said, pinning me against an old wooden table. His hands were on my hips, pulling me toward him, and I felt how much he desired me, how much he needed me. I didn't resist. I didn't want to. He lifted my dress, his fingers finding their well-known path, and I arched my back, clutching the edge of the table as he touched me with a precision that made me tremble. "You are my weakness," he whispered, his mouth trailing down my neck, his teeth grazing my collarbone as I moaned softly. Then he turned me over, positioning me on the table, and I felt the heat of his body against mine, the urgency in his movements. His lips were at the nape of my neck, his hands exploring every curve, every inch of skin he could reach. He took me there with a passion that was almost wild, yet so full of care that I felt adored, not just possessed. Afterwards, he pulled me to the floor, laying me on a soft rug, and started all over again. The fingers dancing between my legs, his mouth drawing hot trails over my body, until I was begging for him again, his name escaping my lips like a prayer. We spent the entire day like that, amidst sighs and muffled moans, the sun moving across the sky as he took me from one room to another, claiming me in every corner of that villa. Against the wall. On the sofa. On our knees. On the floor. He seemed insatiable. And I, who had never known this kind of pleasure before him, found myself asking for more, surrendering completely. "You drive me crazy," he said, his voice husky as he held me tight. And I felt the same, a craving that grew with every touch, every look. When night fell, we lay in the villa's bed, our bodies intertwined, sweat still glistening on our skin. He traced lazy circles on my belly, his eyes fixed on mine, and there was something different there. It wasn't just desire. It was tenderness, a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I never knew I could want someone like this," he confessed, his voice low, almost a secret. "You changed everything." My heart stopped for a moment. I wanted to say something, but the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I pulled him closer, kissing him with a passion I didn't even know I possessed. And as our lips met, I realized it wasn't just pleasure that bound me to him anymore. It was him, the man behind the ruthless millionaire who now looked at me as if I were more than just a possession, more than just an arrangement. I was falling in love. And that scared me as much as it made me want to stay. Lying there, with the sound of crickets outside, I felt a peace I had never known, but also a certainty. He wanted me every day. And I, against all odds, wanted to be his. Not because of the money or the power, but because with him, I felt alive. The drive back to Venice was quiet, yet the air between us was charged with something new. After Florence, after that villa where Lorenzo claimed me in every possible way, I could no longer deny what I felt. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my leg, his warm fingers against my skin. And I found myself gazing at him, the sharp profile, the dark eyes that now shone with something beyond desire. I was no longer just the virgin forced into a marriage with a ruthless millionaire. I was his. And he somehow was becoming mine. We arrived at the palazzo at dusk, the sky tinged purple over the Grand Canal. He pulled me inside without a word. But his eyes said it all. "Have you ever imagined a life without me?" he asked, pressing me against the door as it closed. His voice was low, almost a purr. And I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Because I can't." I could answer, his lips were on mine, hungry, and I surrendered to the kiss as if it were the only thing that mattered. He took me to the room, but this time it was different. There was no rush, no wild urgency like on the other nights. He removed my dress with a slowness that made me tremble, his fingers brushing my skin as if they wanted to memorize every inch. "You are everything I want," he whispered, his mouth trailing down my neck, stopping at my chest where I felt the warmth of his breath, making me arch against him. His hand slid along my back, down to my thighs, and he lifted me, laying me on the bed with a delicacy that contrasted with the strength I knew so well. Then he touched me, his fingers tracing soft circles between my legs, preparing me for him with a patience that was almost torturous. I moaned softly, clutching the sheets, and he smiled against my skin, his lips finding every piece of me he could reach. "Let me feel you," he murmured, and I opened myself to him, feeling the warmth of his mouth, the pressure of his fingers, until my whole body was singing under his touch. When he finally joined me, it was slow, deep, as if he wanted me to feel every part of him, filling me, making me his in a way that went beyond the physical. Then he turned me over, pulling me against his chest and took me again, his hands holding my hips as I moved with him, lost in the dance of our bodies. "You are mine," he said, his voice husky with emotion. And I responded, with sighs, with moans, with his name escaping my lips. We spent the night like that, moving through positions he chose with care and passion, each one more intense than the previous, until I was trembling in his arms, pleasure coursing through me like waves in the canal outside. When the sun rose, we lay together, our bodies still intertwined, sweat still glistening on our skin. He traced lazy lines on my arm, his eyes fixed on mine, and for the first time, I saw love there, pure, vulnerable, real. "I forced you to marry me," he said, his voice soft, almost regretful. "But now I would do anything to keep you by my side, not for money, not for power. For you." My heart raced. I turned to him, touching his face, feeling the stubble of his beard under my fingers. "I don't want to leave," I confessed. And it was the truth. What began as a prison had become my freedom. I loved the way he touched me, how he made me feel alive. But more than that, I loved him. The man who had claimed me so many times, but who now gave himself to me with the same intensity. He pulled me into a kiss, sweet and deep, and I knew that we had changed. We were no longer the ruthless millionaire and the forced virgin. We were a couple in love, addicted to each other, unable to live apart. He took me again that morning, with a tenderness that made me cry. And I gave myself entirely, knowing it was forever. That night, back at the palazzo, he loved me like never before. His lips traced every part of me, slow and reverent, as if he wanted to worship me. His hands guided me tenderly, finding the spots he knew so well, making me arch against him as soft sighs escaped my lips. "You are my home," he whispered into my ear, holding me tight as we moved together, the pleasure growing until it swallowed us whole. It was no longer about possession or pure desire. It was about us, about the love we had built from the ashes of a forced beginning. When we